Hey folks, time for another Bearded Wonder Explains. Today I want to talk about checks and balances in 2021, and I want to kind of look at a little bit further what we're talking about throughout the government course, and to suggest that maybe the checks and balances that exist in 2021 are very different from the checks and balances that existed in 1791 when the country and the Bill of Rights was created. So I've outlined in another video the fact that I think that there is this 3D political system that exists within our country, but that there's really only a difference between the Republican and Democrat parties on one of those three dimensions. That they both kind of tend towards an authoritarian, in other words, the government decides instead of an individual, and they both tend towards a national rather than a state government having the ultimate sovereignty when it comes to making laws. And so there is this idea that if there's only this difference on this one axis, why can't we just compromise on that axis and get everything together? And one of the reasons why I think is because there's a lot that we feel because it's an authoritarian system in the national government, right? Because the government's going to decide according to the Democrats and the Republicans, not necessarily because of the people, but because you believe that the government is going to force a definition on you. You want to make sure that that definition is the one that you agree with more. You might prefer that there's not a definition at all, but because the political parties aren't giving you that option, you tend to feel like you have to have the definition that lines up with you. And because it's not in your state to decide what those definitions are either, it forces a lot of Americans, I think. Now, of course, this is me coming from, you saw where I was in the other video. I'm coming from a very anti-political party. Like, I don't really closely line up with the Democrats or the Republicans, and so I'm kind of critical of both. But basically what I see happening, and this is my opinion, is that our government or our Republican and Democrat kind of axis is causing a lot of people to feel like we have to stop them before they take our rights away. And them and they is whatever party you're not, or whichever party you're not closer to. And so they're the people that don't think like us. You'll notice that both Democrats and Republicans talk about bipartisan. What's bipartisan legislation? Well, it's basically making a law that I agree with. And so basically when we define these terms in these ways as an us and a them, it splits the American people in half. And because we think that there's so much riding on it, we're forced to kind of shift based on our party alignment from where we'd actually prefer the government to be, which gives those parties a lot more power and builds walls between parties on all three of these axes. Even though the people, I think, for the most part, have more in common than we might be led to see. Those walls, so that would be the first one, the first kind of system that's keeping us divided, or checks and balances, would be the political parties. The second one is social media and media in general. And the reason why is because if we want to find out what's true, we have to go through media to get there. And usually we go through specific types of media that we believe is going to give us an accurate representation of the truth. And what this does is, even if I want to critically think, let's say I want to hear what the Democrats think, the most common place that a Republican is going to hear what the Democrats think is from Republican-controlled media. And the same is true for a Democrat. The most common place a Democrat is going to hear what Republicans think is from Democrat media or social media. And so basically, what that's going to do is end up getting us into a situation where you're getting information, but maybe not the truth. Um, and so the social media and the media that controls our access to these things also has a lot of power. Finally, the Supreme Court is ultimately going to be what I would argue is the third one, because they kind of decide the winners and losers. So if we wanted to look at the political landscape or the checks and balances that I want to argue kind of exist today, the first one is the political parties, because if we're really concerned about them controlling our lives, we put a lot of stock and power into these political parties to protect us from them, whichever one the us and the them is for you. The second one is the political parties, or the media outlets, because they're the ones that give you truth, and I would argue actually give you information, which might not be the same thing as truth, about what the political parties are telling you. So when you look up things, you look them up through Google, which means that Google is filtering your sources. Sometimes based on what Google thinks is the right answer. You might have noticed that recently YouTube updated its policy, so it is no longer going to distribute vaccine and what it considers to be false information about vaccines based on whatever its definitions are of science. Now, that might be a good thing. It might not. That depends kind of on what you think about vaccines, I think. But the fact is that Google is not going to tell you certain things about vaccines from certain people, which means you can't get that, literally cannot get that information from Google, even if you wanted to. So, but those systems are regulated through the government, which is already, we've kind of argued, controlled by the political parties. And so the checks and balances are that the government kind of regulates these businesses, it taxes these businesses, it decides what they can say and what they can't say. And when people are looking up information to decide who they're going to vote for, they go through the media. And the media picks what people see about the political parties. So those would be kind of those checks and balances. And since the Supreme Court is kind of picking it, if we look at the political parties as basically appointing Supreme Court justices through the presidency and through the House and the Senate, they're appointing the Supreme Court justices, but ultimately the justices are approving or rejecting or reinterpreting any kind of laws that come out of the government from the political parties based on what the Supreme Court argues. And they're also going to make those rulings for media companies, and the media companies are going to control how people interact with their parties, which is a part of the appointment process for the Supreme Court. And what I want you to kind of notice is that if these three parties, or if these three are really the ones that are controlling government today, which one is controlled by the people? So we've got the Supreme Court, we've got the political parties, and we've got media companies. And if people are meant to be a part of the political process in our government, popular sovereignty, the idea that the government represents us, I think that we're in a real interesting situation where it's quite possible that none of the people that have a lot of power within our society, they control how we interact with the world, how we interact with each other, literally what the laws are that we live by. None of them is directly accountable to the people. Technically the political parties, but as I've stated before, I think that most of us feel that so much is on the line for these elections because of them and how scary they are. I think that in a lot of cases, we're willing to support a party that really doesn't represent our views very closely. Certainly, if there were more options, we would pick something maybe a little bit different than what we do. But because we think that we don't have better options, we choose the lesser of two evils, which just ends up being something that's vaguely similar to us, or at least more similar than the other options. Just some things to think about. This is mostly an opinion video, so you're welcome to completely disagree with everything that I've just said, and you won't lose any points for it. It is something that I think that everybody should at least think about and consider in today's political climate. That's it for me today. Have a good one.